Hey, this is Chris. Hope you're doing well, and welcome to Popcorn Finance, the show where we discuss finance in about the time it takes to make a bag of popcorn. Back in July of 2021, the Biden administration expanded the child tax credit, but this expansion expired on December 31st of 2021. And so there's a lot of questions now on the impact that the loss of this expanded credit will have on families. And so to help me understand this a little bit more and break this down, I'm joined by Leigh Phillips, the president and CEO of Saverlife, which is a nonprofit that uses data and tech to help members save and also to push for better policies across the country. So Leigh, thanks for joining me here.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris.
I wanted to jump in and ask you, what is some of the impact that you've seen that this child tax credit or the loss of this expansion of the child tax credit has had on working families?
Families were receiving payments for the last 6 months of 2021, and that was about $300 to $350 per child. What we were seeing is that those payments actually had a really stabilizing impact on family finances. So when we're looking at household income in the US, as we can look at the kind of the number, right? Like how much is the annual income of a typical household. But what we don't always see is how volatile people's income and expenses really are. So what I mean by that is that not everybody gets a salary paycheck with the same dollar amount every 2 weeks, right? A lot of people work hourly wage jobs. A lot of people are employed in the gig economy. They're self-employed, and incomes are volatile. They go up and down. We also know that expenses definitely recently have been on the rise, right? There's a lot of talk about inflation and other things. But even before that, things were expensive, right, for families. You think about childcare and paying the bills, utilities, those types of things. So what we were seeing with the child tax credit when those monthly payments were going out was that families had more stability in their finances. So some of the outcomes that we were looking at were things like families were paying more of their utility bills in full and on time. So we're seeing increased payments towards utilities for people receiving the child tax credit compared to people who didn't receive that tax credit. We also saw that savings balances remained relatively stable. So in the early days of the CTC, we saw savings balances go up. Then we saw that kind of stabilizing. So people were not making withdrawals, even though things have been getting more expensive. So over the last 6 months, we started to see that stabilizing impact on families. Now, what's unfortunate is because Congress did not pass the Build Back Better bill, which I'm sure everyone's been hearing about in the news and all the drama around that. Will they, won't they, right up to the last minute in December. That meant that those payments have ended. That extension and expansion of the child tax credit has ended as of right now. So we'll see what happens, right? Anything could happen in the next few months. And we are fighting very, very hard for that expansion to be made permanent. So what we'll start to see and we'll be tracking over the next couple months is now what happens when people have lost those payments. Most families that we talked to in our surveys knew that they were temporary. So in some ways, that's a good thing because we hope people weren't making major life changes based on thinking that these funds were going to be coming every month, while their kids were under age 18. But what's really sad to me is that this was a great experiment, right, in American financial stability. What can we do to help stabilize our households, particularly those with lower incomes? And what families and parents told us they would do if that money was made permanent, those monthly payments, was to focus on their kids' future. So almost 90% of families said that they would start investing in extracurricular activities, tutoring, other things to help their kids' education, and to start saving for their kids' education. So that really is where we would see those impacts if these credits were made permanent.
I host another podcast called This is Awkward along with my co-host Allison. And on this show, we discuss your awkward money situations like this one right here.
We have different worldviews about many things, one of them being money. We've never directly discussed it, but through her stories and other sources, I have noticed that she has a very odd relationship with money and never pays anything on time. I bought something for her once because I had to go to the specialty store anyway, and it took her 2 months and a few reminders to pay me back for an item under $100. She has told me before that she thinks it's normal to pay bills when you have the time as opposed to when it's owed. She told me this in reference to a therapist she paid 2 weeks after her appointment and thought they were irrational when they refused to see her for a second time. This is one of many examples.
So if you want to find out how we would handle this awkward money situation, or you want to send in your own situation for us to discuss on the podcast, search for This Is Awkward on the podcast app you're listening to this show right now, or go to the show notes to find the link. This was a very interesting experiment in looking at how providing more direct support to families with, especially those with lower income, the impact that has, because I think we see a lot where there's, tax breaks and incentives given to corporations and the very wealthy, but oftentimes it doesn't make its way down to those in the lower income brackets. So it's fascinating to hear how giving direct aid to those families, direct funds, not making them wait until tax filing season, which is a long time to wait to feel the impact of that credit, how that has made changes in these families' lives. So what is the connection exactly, though, when we look at the child tax credit itself? And then as we're approaching tax season, because we're recording this right now in February, a couple months away from the tax filing deadline, how is this all impacting these families, those who receive the credit and those that are kind of wondering if they're going to get it again in 2022?
So you raised a couple of really important points. So the first one is that we give a lot of tax credits to rich people. If you think about the 401k deductions, mortgage interest rate deductions, all of those things are ways that we build wealth for upper middle class families, basically, in this country, because you have to have those types of assets and access to those types of things in order to benefit. You also have to have like a tax liability, right?
Yes.
So reducing your taxes is going to be a big deal for you. If you're a family with a lower income, you're not paying that much in taxes. You may not have access to 401k. You may not have, a lot of deductions and things. And even if you did, it wouldn't really make much difference to you because you're not reducing your tax liability. So that's really important to note, right? Like when we think about these things, oftentimes they get mischaracterized as giveaways to lower income people, but really it's a way of, I think, giving equally to wealthy people and to lower income people, but
Yes.
just in different ways. And I think that's really important. Typically, when we see people get those refund checks, what we observe is a lot of playing catch up. So people have gone into debt, right? In order to make ends meet, people have put expenses on their credit cards. They may have fallen behind on bills. The other thing we see is people investing in things that maybe they couldn't afford throughout the year. Shockingly, those include things like, medical care, dental care, things that maybe just were not in the monthly budget. So because people have fallen behind throughout the year because their income and their expenses just don't match up, we usually see those credits being used primarily for families to catch up. So in our opinion, you're really losing what could be a great moment of economic mobility and wealth building if people were able to put those tax credits towards down payment on a home, kickstarting a college savings accounts, putting some money away for retirement. That's what we would like to see. But instead, what we see is people using that money to catch up, right? And so what was different about the child tax credit was because it was a little bit more money. The child tax credit has been around for many, many years, right? Everybody gets $2,000 per child, right? Regardless of income and so on and so forth as a tax credit. But what was different this year was it was extended and expanded, and then they had those monthly payments. And that really meant the families weren't going to fall as far behind on their bills and on their other expenses, and were able to spend more money on the things they needed when they needed them, as opposed to having to wait for this kind of lump sum payment to play catch up.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big difference between having a stable flow of income during the course of the year or getting more money in one short period of time. I think knowing you're behind all year has an additional psychological effect on top of the obvious monetary impact having to your household when you don't have that money. So I think it was a really interesting twist to the child tax credit to push that out as a monthly payment versus making individuals wait. And I mean, this study had so much information, and I wish I had time to ask you even more questions to dive deeper into the study. But if people want to learn more about the research that was done and the results of this study, where can they go, or if they're just going to connect more with Saverlife?
So saverlife.org is the place where people can go and find out more about us and hopefully join Saverlife and sign up. We're doing a lot of advocacy work, a lot of work right now to see if we can convince those in power here in Washington, D.C., that these child tax credits really are a critical lifeline for families. And, beyond our own research, what we're seeing, what's being reported is that, we're cutting child poverty in half. Like, that was the impact of these payments. So absolutely significant for families and a real game changer for people. And I really hope that if you're listening to this and you want to call your congressperson or your senator and tell them that you want them to vote for the CTC, that would be a good thing to do.
Well, thanks for providing some more insight into this. Hopefully people understand this a little bit better and how this worked, and give them a reason to hopefully push for more change in the future. So thank you so much, Leigh, as always, for joining me here on the podcast. And hopefully I can have you back on again and talk about maybe the fact that this became a permanent thing.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for reporting on this really important issue.
And thanks to all of you for joining me here for another episode. If you want to be a part of a future episode, you can send your questions to me over on Instagram by looking for Popcorn Finance Podcast, or you can email your questions to questions@popcornfinance.com. And this week's kernel is going out to an extremely talented listener. Her name is Jackie. She goes by Jackie P. Ramos on Instagram. She so kindly sent me a portrait that she drew. Let me just say, it's incredible. I'm speechless. She is an incredible artist. I'm amazed by her work. If you want to check it out, I have it posted on my Instagram account right now, Popcorn Finance Podcast. Or more importantly, go check out Jackie's Instagram account. It's Jackie P. Ramos. And so that's JAKI P. Ramos, just the letter P and then RAMOS. Jackie, thank you so much for not only listening to the podcast, but for this amazing, amazing piece of art. As always, I appreciate you all joining me here for yet another bag of popcorn. I hope you have an amazing rest of your week, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, boy, keep it poppin' like Mary Poppins.